So welcome everyone. We are really excited to have you all join us for our first training webinar, Employment 101. If you are wondering, we are here talking about improving HIV health outcomes through the coordination of supported employment and housing services. This is the first of many webinars that we will be doing throughout the project. So just wanted to give you guys a couple of instructions for this conference call, and so how to work Zoom. So just so you all know, we are actually recording this conference call, this webinar. So if you are attending and you can't stay till the end, or if you have somebody that you'd like to share this with, this will also be made available to you. The recording will be made available. And we also will be using computer and telephone audio for this call. When you log on to Zoom, it'll prompt you, and you can decide which of those options you'd like to choose. So to minimize background noise, we just want you all to know that we are muting all of the attendees, but our panelists will actually be unmuted for the duration of the webinar. And we will be able to ask them questions via text. So please be sure that if you have a question, that you enter it in the text box, which we can see, and we will make sure that we ask the panelists on our webinar. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, also just use that chat box on the right-hand side, and we will chat back at you and let you know what you need to do to correct any of the technical difficulties. So just taking you through the agenda for our Employment 101 webinar, we are going to be joined by Jane Fox, who is the Senior Project Director and co-PI for our Evaluation and Technical Assistance program here. And we're also going to be joined by a few other folks who are going to take us through ODEP, the SEED initiative, state policy, the Department of Labor resources for ODEP and ETA, and then we'll be discussing a few community-based resources as well. And we have an hour with you, so we're going to run through this pretty quickly and also make sure that we give you some time for questions as well. Now I'm going to introduce Jane Fox, our Senior Project Director here.
Hi, everyone. As Jessica said, we are thrilled to start our webinar series on this initiative. So as you know, and I know that you've heard this in many places, and we will keep saying this, the gist of this initiative, which is somewhat new for HRSA, particularly for the SPINS initiative, is a three-pronged approach where we're the federal level, and we're asking all of you on the local level to have relationships with HIV primary care, as well as partners in your agencies and or communities that will support the services around the provision of housing for persons living with HIV, as well as employment services. You know, just to reiterate again, this is not an initiative that actually pays for those services, but the initiative is really, the innovation here is the coordination of those services. And so having a coordinated effort to provide those services as well as link and maintain persons in HIV care. So I'm going to pass this on to Nadia. Nadia Abraham is a Senior Policy Advisor at ODEP, and she's going to be sharing with us the resources that we and HRSA and Ryan White are hoping that you will be accessing within your communities to support the employment services. Oh, and sorry, and then we will also hear from Maisha, who is with the Department of Labor, the Division of Youth Services and in Manpower. She too will be sharing some federal resources that we hope that you will all be able to access in your communities. So I'll pass it on. Oh, and here we go. Here's the purpose. Sorry. Oh, we just did that. So this is a coordinated effort between HRSA, DOL, and HUD. So our learning objectives today are to increase your site familiarity with the American Job Center network, including eligibility requirements for services, resources available to employers, and supports available to consumers. And then also to learn to identify generic and specialized resources available for persons living with HIV along the different phases of the employment continuum. Nadia, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Jane. My name is Nadia Ibrahim, and as Jane mentioned, I'm a senior policy advisor with the Office of Disability Employment Policy within the U.S. Department of Labor. For those who don't know about ODEP, ODEP was established in 2001 as the only cabinet level agency led by an assistant secretary in dealing with employment of people with disabilities in the federal government. Our mission is to develop and influence policy that increases the number and quality of employment opportunities for people with disabilities throughout the United States and within the federal government. We work with private sector employers as well as the federal government agencies to ensure that this occurs. We have a number of policy teams as well as an education and outreach team, and those policy areas that we focus on include youth, the workforce system, employers, and employment-related supports. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with employment-related supports, those are things that we refer to that help someone find and maintain employment. Things like housing, healthcare, things that are essential to allow a person to function in the community and to maintain employment. Next slide, please. One of the major initiatives within ODEP is something we refer to as SEED. For every activity in the federal government, we need a nice acronym. And so the State Exchange on Employment and Disability is meant to foster a nationwide dialogue and workforce more inclusive of people with disabilities. And the way that we do that is to work with what we call state intermediary organizations, organizations that represent state policymakers, legislators, and other state officials. So groups like the Council of State Governments, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, and Women in Government. And our goal is really to expand these groups' capacity to respond to disability employment-related questions and act as a resource, not only for the organizations, but for policymakers in general. And you may be just wondering to yourself, why are we talking about state policy when we're working at the community and local level? And at ODEP, we recognize that a lot of the good work and a lot of policy change happens at the state and local level, and oftentimes what occurs at the federal level doesn't make its way to the state level in a coordinated fashion, and vice versa. We believe that it's important for states and advocacy and other organizations to understand the context in which they work to help them better advance inclusive policies. Next slide, please. This year, our policy priority themes on the SEED initiative include retaining and reemploying ill, injured, and displaced workers, something that I will refer to as stay at work, return to work a little bit later. readying a skilled workforce, harnessing innovation, and empowering veterans with disabilities. And under harnessing innovations, we consider things like autonomous vehicles, access to assistive technology, and such. Next slide, please. One of the first major initiatives under STEED was the establishment of a national task force in collaboration with the Council of State Governments and the National Conference of State Legislatures. That collaboration between ODEP, NCSL, and CSG included about 60 state policymakers, other disability policy experts, representatives from the disability advocacy community, and private sector employers. The goal really was to explore key issues around employment of people with disabilities and identify key themes, as well as provide recommendations to states. And the results of that task force that met over approximately 10 months was a report that we refer to as Work Matters. It really served as the foundation for our work as STEED and continues to serve as a resource to states. We really began that work on the task force with some key understandings about disability and disability employment. Next slide, please. That is just the link to the Work Matters report. You'll find a downloadable version as well as a map of links to state policy examples. And within Work Matters, there are over 240 examples from states on what they're doing related to the employment of people with disabilities. The report also includes 13 policy options for states to sort of tailor and use as they see fit. Next slide, please. These are just how we organized Work Matters. To give you an overview, we first considered policies that communicate at the state level in terms of supporting workforce development and employment access. So broad policies that would help states lay the groundwork for inclusive workforce policies. Some general concepts around disability and disability employment, the idea that everyone, regardless of their disability status, should have an opportunity to work and contribute to their community. Then we looked at preparing for work, training and vocational opportunities, access to education for individuals who need to receive additional training and such. Then we considered getting to and accessing work opportunities. Those employment supports that we mentioned earlier, things like transportation, technology, the supports that make accessing work possible, things like access to healthcare as well. Next, we considered staying at work, and access to health care also falls under this category as well. But this is where we looked at staying at work and returning to work, sorts of issues around retaining ill, injured, and disabled, otherwise disabled workers. And then supporting self-employment and entrepreneurship. Just as the category states, we looked at policy issues around self-employment and creating entrepreneurship opportunities for business owners with disabilities. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of some of the policies that impact those living with HIV and AIDS, we wanted to pull and relate it back to work matters. So with regard to staying at work, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, and Washington have programs to financially incentivize employers and workers to utilize stay-at-work, return-to-work strategies. And Vermont provides private sector employers access to employer assistance programs. Next slide, please. Policy option 13C in Work Matters talks about exploring tax and financial incentives to support disability entrepreneurship, and as it relates to things for those living with HIV and AIDS, we wanted to highlight Iowa and Wisconsin. They both provide grants and microloans to businesses and business owners and entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. Several pending and passed pieces of legislation recently. Pending in New York is a law that establishes access to benefits and services for individuals living with HIV to local Department of Social Services. Next slide, please. And Virginia has enacted a bill around access to housing, especially those individuals who have an assistance animals, and protecting their rights to have that assistance animal with them in their dwelling. Next slide, please. Just wanted to touch upon SEED and what we do. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we work with state intermediate organizations and state policymakers. But in your work, if you ever find a need for information to provide to your state policymakers or local policymakers, SEED provides disability employment policy and subject matter expertise, knowledge sharing around employment issues, as well as those issues related to employment. And a key thing that I wanted to mention here is that when the Office of Disability Employment Policy, an agency within the Department of Labor, thinks about employment, we consider those things related to employment, those supports necessary for employment as a key component to successful employment. So we provide information not only around the job itself, but those supports necessary for employment. Tools, crowdsourcing platforms, and other resources such as best practices, state examples, and other information to assist legislators in crafting and sponsoring effective policies, sample state policy options that states have an opportunity to customize for their own needs, access to meaningful disability employment data and data on other related issues, and direct connections to federal agencies such as HRSA, and the Social Security Administration. Next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight both NCSL and CSG disability employment web pages, and you have the address available there. There's a number of resources, a searchable database related to disability and employment, the Work Matters report, as well as a Disability Employment 101 webinar that may be helpful as you're speaking with others in the community. Although it's geared towards state legislators, a lot of the information there can be helpful in your communication. Next slide, please. And again, this is the Council of State Governments webpage, and as I mentioned earlier, they have a clickable map of the United States. So if you wanted to find out disability employment policies that have been recently passed in your state or another state, this would be a great place to look. They also have an e-Academy series on workforce development and people with disabilities, essentially a webinar series on workforce development. And then one of the key things that we did was the Council of State Governments is they have a shared state legislation sort of database, and we were able to pass or help them approve a disability employment policy supplemental package. And so that shared state legislation is available for other states to use as an example, and really provides meaningful and concrete ideas for other states seeking to implement similar policies. Next slide, please. I know all of you are familiar with the Getting to Work training curriculum, but just wanted to remind you where it's available, and just plug that. I know that's part of your grant requirement, that you should all be familiar with that, but again, we think it's extremely important to understand the value of work and incorporating that into the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. The Job Accommodation Network is probably one of our most well-known resources. There on the slide you have the link as well as the voice and the TTY number. The Job Accommodation Network provides free, expert and confidential information and technical assistance to employees, employers, and others working with those who have disabilities. They provide information on workplace accommodations and disability employment issues and disability in general. So if you need additional information, or someone you're working with would like additional information about how they can return to work or continue working with a disability, the Job Accommodation really is your number one source for that. Next slide, please. Another resource that we have is the LEAD Center, and they provide training and technical assistance around policies related to WOIA, financial, maintaining your finances, and also customized employment. They seek to break down the silos of existing systems. So there's a number of webinars and resources available as they seek to also build the capacity of the workforce investment system to meet the needs of job seekers with disabilities. And they really seek to also foster a greater understanding of employment practices that are inclusive of people with disabilities in both the public and private sector. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to pass it off to Maisha so she can tell you a little bit about another agency within the Department of Labor that really handles the American Job Centers and the Workforce Development System. So, Maisha.
Thank you so much, Nada. Thank you so much, Nadia. This is Maisha Memminger. I'm here with the Division of Youth Services under the Employment and Training Administration. Excited to have you all on board working to secure employment and opportunities for persons affected by HIV. I appreciate your work. Really quickly, Employment and Training Administration's main mission is to get people back to work or get people in work, depending if they've been dislocated or if they are suffering from unemployment or want to be trained for new work. And so our main mission is to make sure that we have all those entities in place from the state to the local areas to make sure that one-stop centers are provided for, as well as discretionary funds. We also have discretionary funding, various types of pots of money to make sure that happens. My area is primary youth, and we primarily focus on the WIOA workforce system, which is the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which passed in 2015. Thank you for jumping. I'm going to go backwards and forwards. I'm so sorry. And basically, again, it's designed to make sure that people get to work, that we provide labor market information to local systems to make sure that they are training and employing folks on a path that works best for their regional or local economy, and also making sure that people are educated in those areas to meet the regional local economy. So if you want to go back one slide, thank you so much. I apologize for that. So again, just some of the resources that we have, we primarily use, and I believe you guys have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful resource sheet that was put together for you all. One place that we normally have a lot of our resources and tools are on workforcegps.org. So if you want to find out what we're putting out or what we are linking to, as far as we even link to outside organizations, as far as research and tools and resources, we use workforcegps.org. And we focus a lot of our information on reentry. We work with folks that are coming back home from incarceration to make sure they have the tools that they need to reengage. We also make sure, and we call it Justice Involved Youth and Adults as well. We want to make sure that we focus on young people ages 14 to 24, whether they be in school or out of school. Again, young people who are in school but kind of struggling and may have difficulties staying in school, we want to work with them. And those who have detached from the formal education system and are not working, we want to make sure that we re-engage them in workforce and training. We also want to make sure that we connect people to our American Job Centers. They're formerly called Career One-Stops, and I still call them Career One-Stop Centers, but they're all throughout the country. There are hundreds and hundreds of them throughout the country, and they call them different things around the country, but they're normally branded as a American Job Center. So when somebody comes into that American Job Center, taxpayer dollars are used to make sure that they are connected to employment and training, and there's opportunities for them to get funding for anything from eyeglasses to helping them get their driver's license, any kind of barrier. We'll try to lift that barrier up to make sure that they get what they need to get a job. We also do training, whether it be virtual or in person. We really push apprenticeships here. Under the current administration and the previous administration, apprenticeships are very important, where folks can be able to come in and get on-the-job training. They can learn and earn, as we call it here, and not just get learn and earn, but also be able to, again, afford the opportunity to get a salary of some sort or some type of stipend so they can support themselves and support their families while they're learning. So apprenticeships are a huge push here at the Department of Labor. And again, we want to make sure people are making a living wage, they're meeting the industry needs as well. So if you can go to I think you can skip the WIOA slide and go to our next slide. Thank you. Next slide. And just wanted to share with you guys how our formula funds work, and I'll talk also through discretionary funding. Well, the Department of Labor, we put forth a proposed budget to Congress, and they work very diligently to try to approve that budget or lower that budget or increase that budget. And what that budget happens is we then get the funding from our government, and we then distribute it to state workforce boards or state agencies. So hopefully you all know who your state agency of workforce board is, and you should have a relationship with them. If you do not, or learn who's running that. And what they do is they then distribute the funds to local workforce development boards. And I want to stop here for a second. The workforce development boards are in your area. They are there to know what is going on with your community directly, what jobs are coming in, what jobs are possibly leaving, what opportunities, who we need to train for what areas. These are where the employers will come and say, hey, we want to come into city X, and we're looking to build a factory over here. We're going to be doing windmill production. They actually contact the state or local workforce board. So those boards know what's going on. They know what training needs to happen. So they use labor market information. They work with the community colleges, and they actually have a board where they invite education leads, workforce leads, employers. They invite youth. If you sit on a youth council, a youth standing committee, they invite them to sit at the table once a month at least, and they talk about what's going on and how we're going to share this information with our community. And so those are open meetings. So if you ever want to know what's going on with your local area workforce development, I encourage you all to find out where they are. And you can find this information on careeronestop.org. There is an opportunity for you to run your zip code and find out what is going on in your area as far as your local one-stop center or career job center, as well as your workforce development board. Who is the main contact? And these are volunteer positions, so sometimes you may have a main contact list, but that's no longer the contact, but hopefully it'll get you in touch with the contact you need to. So we really encourage you to be a part of that conversation as you guys are now grantees and you guys are working in your area to connect folks to jobs. From the boards, they then do some research, they find out what's going on, and they then hire or run through a process of finding people who can provide services to the population to get them engaged in work. So you all are service providers. Some of you are service providers. You may be a qualified or eligible service provider to meet the needs in a certain area of workforce development or supportive services. Not only do we pay for workforce development or connect to workforce development opportunities, but we at Labor can't do everything. We are not trained in traumatic stress. We're not trained in mental health services. We're not trained in child care. But we do help link our participants to those services or even help pay for those services if they are a barrier to employment. So therefore, we look for those providers. We look to make sure that they are a part of our circle so that when somebody comes through our doors and says, you know what, I really need some help with child care. I can't, get to work on time. Can I get some assistance? We're able to help with that or connect them to state funding, or we may have some funding to be able to make sure that person beats that barrier. So those are areas in which we have a wealth of resources, a wealth of connections, and we look forward to working with you all there in your local areas. And so I think my next slide is not me. Is that next slide for me? I think that's, yeah, and you guys know about WIOA. And also I want to share, if you go back to the other slide, we have also discretionary funding. So formula funding is actually based upon a formula based upon the population of the area, how much money they should get out of the pot. We also have discretionary funding, and these are basically what we do is we kind of think outside the box and try to fund high schools and try to fund nonprofits to do some innovative work around certain populations and certain troubles or problems that we're having in a certain area. So there's a lot of discretionary funding that's on the ground right now with a reentry population. We have a Youth Build. Youth Build is a program that works with young people who are disconnected from education. They go into a center and they spend half of their day in the classroom getting a high school diploma, and the other half of their day they spend it on a construction site building homes for persons in their neighborhoods. We have Job Corps, which is its own program in itself. We have TACT, which looks at community colleges and how we link to community colleges. So we have discretionary funding throughout the nation. And that's an opportunity where we're learning from those discretionary funded grantees what's working and what's not working. And so we lean upon their expertise and what they're doing in the field to help shape how we maybe get out more grant funds, pull back grant funds, or even look at how we do our formula work. So we also have a wealth of what we're learning from them on workforcegps.org for your learning pleasure. So we look forward to, again, working with you. And I think I'm done. Am I done? Who do I go to next? I think I'm done. I think my slide came in. All right. I think, Nadia, I go back to you, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
back to Nadia.
Back to Nadia. Okay, Nadia, take it away.
Thank you, Maisha. I just wanted to close this out by touching upon some disability-specific programs and services, and those are available on the document that was sent to you earlier. Just wanted to highlight that a lot of those resources are some are sort of federally focused, some are state focused, and some are individual resources for individuals. They range from protection and advocacy information, allowing people to advocate for themselves or advocating for them, to providing information and resources around disability resources available in the community, to teaching independent living skills and helping people access assistive technology. There's also some ADA related informational resources, as well as job related. And one resource in particular that I don't believe is on your sheet is the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is a department established under federal legislation, and they provide state funds as well as assistance to individuals who are either transitioning from high school to college or secondary education, to those also transitioning into the community, either to access additional education or find and maintain employment. Different states have different eligibility criteria for vocational rehabilitation services, and so I would just encourage you to seek them out in your state and find out the eligibility criteria. And some states, because of limited funding, have a priority with which they provide assistance and funding. So not everyone living with HIV or AIDS will be eligible for vocational rehabilitation services funding or assistance. It just depends on their level of disability and how much their major life activities are impacted by their disability, as well as their ability to find and maintain employment. So next slide. That's just our contact information for both Maisha and myself. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us, either today, or I know how it usually happens. You hang up from a call and suddenly you have a question you didn't think of. So please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer your questions. And if we don't know the answer, we'll connect you with someone who does. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. And I think we'll go back to Jane.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nadia and Maisha. This has been fantastic. So we are opening up the chat lines. As Jessica said earlier, if you have questions, please type them into the chat. They will come directly to us. We will read them out and answer them. There was a question during the presentation asking if we would be doing any sort of webinar or training and technical assistance on the Rehabilitation Services Administration, kind of from RSA, particularly around benefits and eligibility for services. So we actually had a meeting this morning with our team, and as some of you have already heard from us on calls, we have our next webinar in April set up. We have our two kind of housing and then employment 201s that we'll be doing at the grantee meeting. And so for June, we will be focusing in on those services, as well as talking about benefits and eligibility and income. So yes, thank you. Great, great question, and we put it on our docket. Other questions, comments, deep thoughts? Who do we contact to get additional funding on discretionary funding in our local area? Maisha, is this you?
It is me. Oh, sorry. It is me. I was on speaker. You want to definitely make sure that you are a part of the grants.gov, as you guys probably well know, community. We have to list all our funding there, so we wouldn't have anything necessarily listed on our site. We also have Doleta, DOLETA.gov site, and we have a /grants page, and sometimes we have some information on there, but we primarily put everything on grants.gov, and I'm sure you all are part of that community to learn more about upcoming grant opportunities.
Awesome. So it sounds like discretionary funds are available through grant funding through grants.gov.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
nice.
And also if you want to learn about what opportunities for funding, that's federally, but if you want to know what opportunities are available locally, you got to get in contact with your workforce development board. So that's why I want to encourage you all to know who's on that board, what are they talking about, what are they funding, because they're the ones who actually pay for services at the local level. They're the ones who give the money out on the local level. So you may want to definitely get in contact with who's in charge there as well.
Wow, that sounds like fantastic homework for our upcoming grantee meeting. Everyone go out and explore your workforce development board, please, in your area.
Yes.
Other questions, comments, things we can help with or address? Oh, come on. Let's go. Come on, friends. Here we go. Atlanta is notoriously difficult to break into with regards to workforce development access. What can we do? Any contacts, local or otherwise? So Nadia or Maisha, is there a listing of program directors or PIs or who's in charge of what grants that folks can access so that they can go directly to the persons that they want to work with?
I'm gonna let Maisha respond to that, but what I would also just add is that I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to sort of bring to your attention some of the legislation that's passed in some states relating to individuals living with HIV and AIDS. I think there is significant opportunity for organizations and appropriate individuals to advocate for additional resources and the inclusion of this particular population in relevant funding and legislation. So
that's and as well, your state workforce agency should have this information, as well as your local. And I know some areas are harder than others to get information. The information is supposed to be public. It's supposed to be public, and everybody's supposed to be invited to it. I know we've heard hiccups throughout the country in certain areas where it has not been as welcoming or open. We try to work to get those barriers lifted. We try to connect folks to. We have some people who work on that directly. So yes, if you're having difficulties, let me know, and I'll try to find out who can help you with that directly on the ground level as far as the Workforce Investment Board or the Workforce Development Board in your area.
Great. So would you say that most of these things are available on the statewide level? So does I'm just thinking like Ryan White has funding that goes to state health departments. Is there a department in each state government that would receive funding as well as then funding for regional boards or city governments? How does that work?
if you go back to my funding slide, my flow slide, again, we give the money to the state based upon a formula, based upon population. And so, yes, absolutely, there is a state workforce agency. They're called different things throughout the nation, right? I think in Maryland, they're called I forgot the name of it. It's a long name, but there is a state workforce agency, and that should be on your government website. It's somewhere probably in the capital of your state, and there's somebody who's a commissioner or the lead on that. And there is, within that is, of course, a bureaucracy, divisions of different areas, and there should be somebody you should be able to contact, or an office you can contact. However, that becomes kind of daunting when you look at that thing. It's just looking at the federal government and who do I contact. But again, that agency is responsible for providing a formula of funds to the local areas, again, based upon the need and the population. So there should be a local board. If you're having difficulties with the local board, I would go to your local one-stop center and ask them, who is your local board lead? The one-stop center should be very, it's supposed to be very accessible to all persons who live in your community, whether they have a disability, whether they are a person who has limited English proficiency. So this is supposed to be an area that folks can come in, because that local one-stop center or American Job Center is supposed to be meeting the needs of that area. So if there's a strong Spanish-speaking population in that area, they are supposed to have somebody there to help connect folks who speak Spanish to workforce opportunities. And so that may be a need in that area, where in another community, it may be a Chinese strong population of folks who speak Cantonese and Chinese. And so they're supposed to meet the needs of that area. So that's more of an accessible point to come in, shake hands, talk to somebody there, say, we do this, we do X, Y, Z. How can we partner with you? How can we get with you guys? How can we connect our persons to your services? How can we maybe get some of your people to help them out? And then, and who's in charge of your worker? Because over them is the local workforce development board. And so sometimes starting from the ground level and the worker bee level is a little bit easier than trying to hit that state level, because that's very daunting. And you try to send an email to a blank email account where nobody checks it, right? We don't want that. So I always say go with the worker bee level, connect to your peers on that level, and then create collaborations there, and then try to find out how you work your way up to other opportunities.
Maisha, do you know, are those state workforce development board meetings open meetings anyone can attend?
Yes, they are supposed to be open meetings. I have heard, I was on a webinar and I said that out loud. So I was like, well, I heard so-and-so's is closed. I mean, some areas may choose for certain times of the year for them to be closed. And I want to make sure I make a distinction. There are local board meetings, and there are maybe state board meetings. The local, not the, I don't know about the state, depends on the state, but the local board meetings are supposed to be public. They're supposed to actually have agendas posted online and let you know when the next meeting is going to be and a contact name. It's supposed to be public so that the community can know what's going on. Yes, they're supposed to be public. And some of them are large where there's 20 members. Some of them only have 5 members. It all depends on what the community needs. And yes, they are to be open. Servicelocator.org will help you find your American Job Center and will help you find your workforce board. There's a search engine there for that. So those are ways to get started on that search.
Awesome, thank you. So Eric, I just had Marina send it to you. I did a quick Google, and you are in luck. Your State Workforce Development Board meets March 1st in Thomasville.
Yay!
So she sent you a link to the agenda. Other questions? Yes, 3 hours away from Atlanta, which, you know, is kind of funny. Not ha-ha funny, but ha funny.
So that, if that's your state, hold on a second, but if that's your state, let me open it up. If that's your state, let me check right quick. If that's for this, so that's state. There should be a local. So that's state. That's the overall state. You want to find your local workforce development board.
Okay.
There's a difference between state and local, right? So state's going to cover everything. There should be a local one. But again, you're right. But there's also a conference call. So there's a conference line and access code as well. And I'm looking at this wonderful agenda. They have a youth committee. A lot of states, a lot of local areas got rid of their youth committees. And so I get excited when I see the word youth committee. So there goes some stuff right there. So there's an opportunity here for you.
Yeah,
And
so
I would join it. Yep.
call in
Yep.
and see what's up. Awesome. So any other questions, comments? Oh, look, awesome. So I urge all of you to go poke around some of these resources. Please find your local workforce development boards, both your state and your local. I'm not promising that there will be a quiz on this in May, but there probably will be, so you might want to come prepared. And with any other, workforce development resources that you can find in your area. Any final questions, comments? Okay, so I want to let you know that, that as we've discussed moving forward, we are planning to do this every other month. The next training webinar is Homelessness 101 or Housing 101, which is, I love it, we call it Homelessness 101. Is April 24th from 1 to 2. Our presenter is Sylvia Mascarello, who is a program director at Liberty Community Services in New Haven, Connecticut. We worked with Sylvia for about the last 6 years on another SPINS initiative, and she is an incredible wealth of information about working through systems, figuring out who your resources are, understanding housing models and what, how to make those models fit the needs of the people that you're serving. So you will receive tomorrow an Outlook invitation for this next webinar. For this webinar, we're sending out a few homework questions. We urge you to complete those homework questions so that we don't have to bug you for the information, so that Sylvia can feel prepared in her presentation and meet some of those needs, individual needs or regional needs that you may have. If you are one of the sites that I coach, you've already heard this. At the May grantee meeting, we will then also do kind of follow-ups to both the Housing 101 and the Employment 101. For employment, we will have someone from the Department of Education Vocational Rehab Department presenting, and then we will have someone from HUD presenting at our grantee meeting in May. And then we also want to spend some time with you building out the trainings for the next, the rest of the year and kind of the next year, thinking not only about what your training and technical assistance needs are, which are very important to us, but we also want to think about products that will live beyond the life of this initiative that will help not only you, the clients that you serve, and others who are interested in doing this work. So we're asking you certainly to come to the grantee meeting with all your thoughts packed up and ready to go, because we will be asking for them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the June webinar, we're going to focus on benefits, entitlements, and income, and we're starting kind of on this macro level of federal resources, and then we're going to start diving down a bit more. So if there are any remaining questions or thoughts or concerns, feel free to type away, but it doesn't look like anyone's typing. Thank you again to our fabulous speakers. Nadia and Maisha, you have been a wealth of information, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at our grantee meeting in May. And in the meantime, yeah, that'd be great. And then if anyone has any needs or questions or comments, you can contact both of our speakers, or you can contact any of us here at BU, and we are happy to help brainstorm with you or direct you to wherever you can find the answer. So with that, thank you. Have a wonderful Thursday afternoon, and we will speak with you again soon. Bye-bye.